He's an associate in the firm Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, who just graduated, 6 years ago in 1973 from this College of Architecture and Planning. He is a registered architect in Illinois. He is a member of the American Institute of Architects. He just got in a few minutes ago, and coming from the sublime weather to ridiculous, he was in Florida, where they're working on a library at Florida Institute of Technology. The projects he has worked on at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, I think you'd be interested in hearing about, and I will give you the names of these. He worked on the Art Institute of Chicago, the School of Art in 1977. He worked for the Organization of American States, a feasibility study and remodeling program in 1974 in Washington, D.C. He worked on the state government precinct development plan in 1975 for Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. He worked for the Chalita Institute design in 1975 in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Quite recently, he worked on the Miami University Art Museum at Oxford, Ohio. That was 1978. The building he worked on with Walter Netsch for the Mayo Clinic, their community medicine facility, and Mayo building subway renovation, was just featured in about a 12-page spread in Architectural Record. That's in Rochester, Minnesota. He worked on the University of, and you'll have to forgive my pronunciation here, Tizi Ouzou, the campus plan and student housing for 1982 in Tizi Ouzou, Algeria, and Craig just got back from there about 6 weeks ago. In Blida, Algeria, he's worked for the University of Blida Teaching Hospital set for completion in 1984. Most recently, Walter Netsch with Craig as associate with also alumni of our college, Moke Sheldon Kratzit in Fort Wayne, were just granted the commission for a new $3 million Fort Wayne Art Museum. It's a real pleasure to have one of our alumni here to speak to us tonight. Craig Hartman.
Okay, thanks. It sounds a little more glamorous, I think, than it is in actuality, but there are certain advantages working for a large firm. Can't hear, huh? Or maybe I can just hold this thing. How's that? Better? Okay. There are definitely advantages to working for a large firm. It sounds very glamorous. It's a lot of hard work, but I guess myself and Jim Kratzit and Dick Moke are living proof that there is life after CAP. I'm going to say I'm very pleased to be here tonight, particularly since I'm not taking exams with you guys the rest of this week. I understand it's going to be pretty tough the next 3 days. I guess most of you have seen the field theory exhibit that was just put up outside. It was originally put together for the Miami Art Museum for a show this summer. And I wanted to mention it in particular because Bill Gerstner, who was a student intern in our studio last summer, was very directly involved with this. It involved a lot of late nights and a lot of weekend work. And I'm sure if Bill had any idea he was going to have to rehang the show, he would have been much less prolific. The exhibit shows the use of field theory, I think, which is in terms of design of 4 individual buildings. Each building has a different program type and to some extent different scope. In each one, the needs of shelter, the impact of the site and environment, and project goals and aesthetic opportunities are all coalesced into a single architectural statement. now that you've had an opportunity to see bits and pieces of this process, I'd like to briefly explain with some slides the philosophy and development of this field theory design process we use, and show in detail two radically different projects in terms of scale and context, which resulted in two radically different solutions that were based on the same thread of continuity, which is this field theory process of design. So if we turn the slides on. Field theory was originally developed by, the concept was developed by Walter Netsch, and the premise was to overcome limitations of the standard orthogonal grid system that's ubiquitous in modern architecture. And the idea was to take a different approach to organizational methodology and flexibility, scale, form, and program. The basis for the methodology that developed was the rotated square, as you see here in these two slides. The concept was, or the vehicle for doing this, was to rotate one equilateral square on top of another. The effect of this very sort of simple procedure results in a variety of potential attachment points for a number of additional rotated squares. Once this point of attachment is established, we begin to develop a repetition, and a multi-dimensional field or grid system can be developed. And this geometric grid system is what we call a field, and hence field theory. The advantage to this system is the clustering and hierarchy possible. It's not necessarily quite as possible with orthogonal systems. The ordering device has a variety of possibilities. It is, however, only an ordering device. Before we proceed with developing a field, we have to first analyze a program for adjacency requirements, for sizes of program areas, and of course do site analyses and so forth. So I have to emphasize that this field theory design process is only a design tool, methodology. It's not a completely separate mystical way of proceeding that develops design in some mysterious manner. Once the program is analyzed, we can normally identify certain repetitive elements in the program. And the field is developed to respond to the element size and organizational needs. You can see that then these individual units may be clustered about central nodal points. And these central clusterings then allow for a variety of space types, as well as different expressions of volumetric forms, both on the exterior and interior. This particularly produces unique expressions of solid and void. The early formal characteristics that resulted from this ordering system took on a highly articulated extruded look with the functional zones clearly articulated, as you can see in these projects for University of Illinois at Circle Campus. Now, a further extension of this expression of the field's character is into a three-dimensional mode, or into the elevation facades of the building. These two examples, again, the Arts and Architecture building at Circle Campus and the Basic Health Sciences building at University of Iowa, are expressions of rather baroque but articulated volumetric expression of the field. Now, in addition to the functional groupings about nodes, obviously these are connected by circulation systems, which may be somewhat less repetitive than standard orthogonal systems. This allows for extensions through a variety of space types which are identified by nodal points that are not necessarily found in orthogonal systems. In addition to the possibility of grouping functional elements, that is to say offices and so forth, the ability also exists within this mode of design to adapt to systems. In this case, it's we were showing laboratory development, lab benches. I think it's clear that the variety of organizations available based upon geometry allow for very efficient distribution systems as well as efficient usage of the systems. In this case, standard lab units were grouped about central core areas and extended off in various geometric patterns to respond to different teaching configurations and different laboratory experiment conditions. Now, after one has developed this series of or sequence of spaces and analyzed the program, it becomes possible with this geometric glassing system to develop a grouping of dissimilar functions. For example, on the right there, excuse me, you see the combination of laboratory units combined with offices around the perimeter. Again, are grouped about central core areas with very efficient circulation systems linking these nodal points. On the left end, you see another packing of office types with central atrium and perimeter offices around the exterior of the building. Again, though, the circulation is developed to a series of nodal points as opposed to standard kind of orthogonal systems. Now, this organizational methodology is also applicable on a much larger scale, and we've gotten the opportunity to experiment with this and use this organizational systems in our work in Algeria. These projects consist of very large educational projects. In this case, these particular projects here represent student housing that we're doing in North Africa near Tizi Ouzou. You can see, though, that the capability exists by a scale change to organize not only the functional elements within the building, but the buildings themselves in the site plan to create certain community relationships between buildings and between the buildings themselves. Of course, again, the basic criteria in establishing the ordering system is the smallest common denominator, which in this case is the student dormitory room. Again, you can see the varieties possible using the same basic room configuration, but grouped about a different geometric latticing system. With that general overview of field theory as a process, I'd like to talk about two particular projects that I've been very much involved in recently, very radically different in scope and scale. One is the Art Museum in Miami University. The second is the teaching hospital that Dean Sappenfield mentioned outside Blida in North Africa. Now, these projects not only have very different contextual differences in terms of the environment and the society and the culture and so forth, but of course the scale of the projects is radically different. At Miami, I assume that most of you are familiar with the campus. The existing architecture consists of kind of neo-colonial and on the existing Miami campus on the left side, and on the right, the old women's Western College, consisting of some actually very nice romantic kinds of fieldstone materials. And our project was sandwiched in between those two zones. Now, it was obviously a very radical departure in terms of aesthetics, but we requested specifically by the client to develop what they called a modern building. So we had a fortunate circumstance of being framed by a woods on one side and a pond, and setting on top of a very slightly sloping crest of a hill. Now, the project was for a very small building, 23,000 square feet, and for a collection at Miami, which was very limited. Consequently, we had to develop ways of amplifying our existing collection and of really capitalizing on both the context of the environment and of really making it a vital educational center as well as a point for displaying art. So we made the decision early on to introduce natural light in a museum, and that's, of course, a very fundamental decision in museum design, whether to use natural light or completely artificial. And since using natural light provided the opportunity of having energy conservation at the same time looking at art under a variety of conditions, we decided to use it, and so we did a number of studies on the ways of introducing light in the museum and ways of using media to augment the existing collection. One early concept was to develop a series of little pods that could be moved about the galleries, which would have rear projection and various media which would augment the existing shows in the galleries. Another idea was to actually use the building envelope as a means of displaying media. And early on we had to also decide how we were going to do circulation through the museum. Obviously, given the fact that this museum was not only a museum in the sense of display of artwork, but also to be used as a vital educational resource, we had to develop very close proximities between gallery spaces and backup storage and research areas. So consequently, we're looking at very simple ways of juxtaposing study pods and research and storage space adjacent to the galleries. So two fundamental approaches were basically the lineal kind of circulation through the gallery and radial circulation around a central courtyard. And in the development of the scheme, we basically developed two alternatives, which is a kind of a standard way that we often work. We develop one or two alternatives that the client can then work from, and we then develop a synthesis scheme. In this case, we had two very radically different schemes, one in which on the right side in the upper section was a very kind of loose form building which kind of edged the top of the crescent of the hill, and the bottom one was a very abrupt object on the site kind of an approach with very strong geometric identity. The top one was a two-level space with a variety of space types and for a variety of exhibition areas. And these two things were developed from the two fields you can see at the left. The client liked very much the idea of a strong geometric object on the site, but at the same time needed a variety of gallery spaces to show the wide variety of different art types that are going to be shown. Consequently, we arrived at a synthesis in which, for the first time, this field theory concept of the repetitive module was expanded from a single repetitive module size to a geometrically linked expanding sequence. And so you can see from the slide on the right that starting from a concentric rotated square, pulling it out along one axis, we developed a series of potential spaces that allowed us in plan then to develop a varying size galleries as you proceed back through the museum. So we have in the lower section of the plan the auditorium area, and proceeding through a series of galleries that sequentially expand in shape or in volume, but retain the same kind of geometric formal identity between them. So you have the opportunity to show prints and small photographs and so forth in the first gallery, and slightly larger paintings and so forth in the second gallery, and then in the larger gallery, contemporary works and sculpture. And then directly abutting that, along the central axis of the museum, is the center research and storage area for student use. Now, this particular field has the capability, or had the unique qualities of a series of syncopated rhythms that developed within the basic module. So we're able to articulate, as you can see in the slide on the right, in the field, a series of sub-rhythms within that overall field system. That then was expressed in the structure of the clear stories, as you can see in the study model on the left, that by using a wood structural system, which gives us slight more flexibility than steel or concrete and so forth in terms of bay spacing. We're able to express that subtle rhythm in actually in the bay spacing of the clear stories. Now, this relationship then not only is expressed horizontally in the plan, but also vertically in the volumetric expression of the building. So that as you proceed from the front of the building to the rear, you have not only a sequentially expanding plan, but also sequentially expanding volume in space. This expanding volume then is expressed not only in terms of spaces that you experience, but in details like the limestone, for example, is as it proceeds from the base of the building to the top, expands in geometric proportion, which is similar to the field itself. It picks up the same geometric progression. So you can see the top of the building is very light and progressing down to a very kind of compact base. And the field in this case also had the unique characteristic of expressing the building's form in the exterior in both a kind of extended segmentalized form at night and a compressed version as you proceed around the building, so that the volumes and perspective, working with the geometry, began to flatten the building out. Now, this is expressed in the day as a very sequential, abstract expression on the side on the left, as you can see, and as you proceed around the building, it begins to flatten out until it's perceived as a very monolithic building. And you can see again expressed in the voids and solids. The slide on the right, the geometric progression from the square to the 1.4, which is the diagonal of the square, to the double square, and the limestone solids there. Now, as any good PolyArc alumni would do, I've brought along a sequence that is on film to give a little better perception of this space. So if you could try to run that movie now, we'll have a look at buildings that go around it. This is, as you approach the museum, along the road past the duck pond, you begin to see the building as you come out behind the trees and experience it as a sequence of separate masses until you proceed around on axis with the building and it becomes a flat, compact expression. Now move inside the building, and you'll see the same sequence in terms of the experience of the space on the interior as you move through from a very light, open experience in the second gallery through a constricted passageway leading into the larger contemporary arts gallery as you see the light coming down from clear stories above and begin to experience that larger volume. Needless to say, Francis Ford Coppola has nothing to worry about. I can see the sequence of the sort of syncopated rhythm within the clear stories, the spacing of the bays themselves. Oops. There we go. So this, by truncating the galleries at the end with floor-to-ceiling glass, we also have the possibility of viewing the art through a variety of different contexts. One is, as you can see with the Nevelson on the left, of looking at it, perceiving the sculpture in silhouette, and as you proceed around, you begin to see the sculpture as it's framed against a neutral wall. Now, in addition to the natural light, obviously we had to augment with artificial light. And in this case, again, given the flexibility of the museum, we designed not only a light track which could move in the standard way laterally across the track, but you can see the little brackets above there to allow the track to move also longitudinally across the trusses themselves. Now this little wall then separating the gallery on the left goes back into the research and study areas. So we have not only natural light in the galleries themselves, but also in the research areas. The media then aspect of the museum took on characteristic of little media niches within the gallery walls themselves. So it provided for rear projection of various media to augment existing shows. In addition to that, we've also provided a multimedia room which is open during the day normally, and is like a lantern at night with the glass exposed, and takes on a completely different context with the solar screens pulled, so it can be used for projection as well. Now, we've also given the duck pond and which had a kind of reflectivity about it. We wanted to reemphasize that as you enter into the museum itself, so we provided a little reflecting pool outside. Now, the reflecting pool itself, we're trying to currently commission a sculpture by George Rickey, who does these kind of mobile wind sculptures. And you can see, again, these are field studies for that, to give him sorts of ideas about the geometry of the building and how he might relate his sculpture to the building. And you can see how within the overall field, sub-rhythms and sub-fields can be developed, which take on the same kind of geometric characteristics of the building itself. And within the details themselves, the geometry, the lattice is also reflected. Now, in total contrast to this little building that we did for Miami, which is really a little object sitting on the side, we're currently involved with, as I mentioned, very large work in Algeria. And not only the climate, but obviously not only the physical climate, obviously the social climate is much different. The zone that we're involved with is right along the Mediterranean, as you can see on the map there on the right. And the physical environment between the Mediterranean and the first range of Atlas Mountains you see down in the green on the bottom of the slide is very extremely nice and gives very nice sort of foliage, and it's extremely amenable climate. And, oh, sorry, going the wrong way here. But the city itself is extremely dense, and as you can see here, but the city as well as the people is really are both really kind of a series of contradictions. It's like a lot of developing countries. There are kind of leapfrog technologies that take place. It's really not unusual at all to see, even down on this street right here, for example, a 16-year-old in traditional Algerian garb walking along with a tape deck playing Bee Gees, Saturday Night Fever. It's absolutely incredible juxtapositions. But on the other hand, the countryside is extremely bucolic, and the French allées of eucalyptus and so forth are very formal. But on the other hand, you have the contradictions and the comparisons of Gardaya, for example, on the right hand, which is on the south side of the mountain range, and Tizi Ouzou, which is the area we're working on for the university project, on the left, which consists of a very mountainous region with hilltop towns. The social climate is also, as I said, a series of contradictions. I must say that bikinis are more rare than camel herds, and it's probably be a while before that changes. But the construction techniques, as you might imagine, are very, very rudimentary and very simple. Where the structural systems consist basically of a system called hurdy-poutrelles. And a hurdy, which is a little concrete block-looking thing on the right there, and poutrelles are on the left, which are both precast, normally at the site, and then are combined, as you can see on the left, into a structural floor slab system. These things, Rod Underwood will love these things, but they're basically poured over then, once they're put up in place with a poured in place concrete frame, and then the whole mess then is poured over with concrete top slab, so that it forms in essence a composite structural system, which is very heavy, but it's very labor intensive and very easy for them to construct. And consequently, that's the system that we're using in all of our construction. A number of outside Western firms have gone into not only Algeria but other developing countries and have imposed or have tried to impose Western technology, and it really has not worked in this country as well as others. Consequently, we're trying very much to stay with indigenous materials and indigenous construction techniques. One of the things that the Algerians are extremely adept at, they're not very good at construction tolerances, but they're very good at covering everything up with plaster. And so consequently, we're using almost entirely masonry infill with everything then plastered over. Now, our particular site is adjacent to a university, which we designed about 2 years ago, and which happily is now finally under construction. The site is about 10 kilometers outside of a little town called Blida. Now, this hospital project is the first phase of a 10 teaching hospital complex or a system or network that's being designed for Algeria. And it's an extremely large project, 800 beds, and it's located on a very rural site, as you can see, at the foot of the Atlas Mountains. It's extremely, a very beautiful site too, I must say, with olive trees surrounding it and the mountains in the background. But the project itself was, as you might imagine, for an 800-bed hospital, extremely complex, and therefore we had to develop a simple means of analyzing the program. We finally were able to break it down to 3 basic component parts. That of the outpatient consultation units, which is shown in the slide on the left, with diagnostic facilities in the orange spine beneath it. And the third basic rough functional criteria was the bed units that you see on the right-hand side. Now, these zones, we broke down into these particular zones for several reasons. One was obviously the functional aspects, so the outpatient consultation units wanting to have separate access, the diagnostic obviously having separate access requirements, and the same with bed units. But in addition to the functional requirements, there were very stringent environmental requirements, as you might expect. And given the kind of contradictory environment we're working in terms of technology, we were very hard-pressed to come up with a way of wedding the technology you expect with a medical institution with a low-tech hospital, you might say. So consequently, these zones respond also to the environmental and technical requirements of the hospital. The zone in the center could in essence be the only zone which is high-tech, which would have air conditioning and very sophisticated equipments and materials. The other 2 zones flanking it could be naturally ventilated and be constructed with using natural light and very low-rise sorts of construction. Now this whole thing then was assembled into a very inelegant architectural solution, but on the other hand, a very kind of straightforward programmatic solution. showing, again, this is only a programmatic phase, showing the relationships of outpatient consultation units to a central diagnostic zone and inpatient bed units flanking on the other side. Then, once we had done this program analysis, we were able to come back and begin to develop a field relationship which brought all these diverse elements together into some kind of geometric unity. And you can see the slide on the left, the way the field response began to develop the formal characteristics of the massing of the master plan on the slide on the right. The basic zones remain the same, although obviously dispersed. The long, skinny block buildings, again, house the high technology kinds of functions, but the blocks are thin enough that they can be augmented by natural ventilation. The triangular buildings marching along on the diagonal above it are the outpatient consultation units, which then relate to a central pedestrian spine that is very clear and easy to be fed into from the central entry. Then the zone between those two long, skinny block buildings, it becomes the inpatient bed units with connection to surgery, and then the other block buildings respond to other kinds of hospital support functions. But again, the zoning relates not only to the functional criteria, but also to the technology and to the construction criteria. The primary entrance is covered with allowing for access to the outpatient consultation units on the left and proceeding on to the inpatient units on the right, and then arriving at the inpatient units, which is attached to directly to the surgery building with a covered bridge and a ramp system. The bed units themselves, then, by using this field theory method of clustering facilities and functional and rooms about a central core, allow us to have a central desk area in each of those pods, which directly supervise 20 beds. And these units of 20 beds then rotate about a shared commons of 40 beds, and then those two are grouped together for 80 beds, and consequently you end up with pairing those two for 160 beds per floor. And again, the shaping of it allows for natural ventilation as well as for direct supervision of patients. Then going along the outpatient consultation unit, again we have the very direct circulation core and accessing to the consultation units themselves. Consultation units were designed around the concepts that we learned at Mayo Clinic, which is the slide you see on the right. At Mayo, we learned that there are very efficient methods of controlling clinics, and are particularly required for, given the low number of highly skilled medical technicians they have in Algeria. Consequently, we had to provide as much as possible centralized control points that minimize the use of highly trained staff, but at the same time maximize the use of control. So you can see that one control point controls essentially two clinics. And of course the difference then in terms of the context of Mayo and Algeria is that Mayo, being an air-conditioned environment, has the center portion filled in, so it's all air-conditioned. And in Algeria, on the other hand, is long and skinny with the center section open, so that we have natural ventilation through. This then is this context of the ventilation is also expressed in the facade, with the north facade on the left side, in the lower portion, having flush windows with allowing lots of natural light in, and the facade on the top of the side being on the south with brise soleil, protecting against direct entry of the sun. Now obviously when we have a very large and high-tech kind of a block system, it needs to be broken down into a series of easily constructed modules. And that, plus the fact that we had seismic requirements which allowed us to make only 20 by 30 meter modules that had to be structurally autonomous, we ended up developing a series repetitive units that, as you can see on the slide on the right. These consisted of a separate stair unit, separate mechanical units, which are stacked vertically, feeding 2 floors each. And in the case of this particular building, the diagnostic building, we have center ventilation cores, so that we're able to get natural ventilation laterally through the building. And at the same time, we're responding to the sun by having recessed window openings on the south side, as you can see in the slide, and the mechanical unit on the left. The slide on the right shows the concept also of the clear story and natural ventilation by opening up the upper band of each floor. We're able to recess the windows in and get a clear story ventilation system that goes all the way through the building. And the lower system then consists of view windows with shutters for privacy. The windows themselves, you can see, are recessed with a curved facade, and this whole thing then is stacked up together into a series of units which comprise an entire building. Now, within this, then, there are a wide variety of plans that are incorporated, but again, there are standard orthogonal kinds of plans within a very simple structural system that respond to a very simple kind of system requirements and the kind of orthogonal hospital equipment that you'd expect. Then a wedding of these two systems, the outpatient consultation units and the inpatient units, is in the infectious disease area. In this area, we've had to provide an exterior circulation around the units to keep the visitors from coming in contact with the patients themselves. In Algeria, it's not uncommon for patients, visitors to actually come and camp out in corridors for up to 2 or 3 days or even a week. So consequently, in all of our schemes, we've had to provide areas where essentially have camping zones within the hospital. And in this particular case, it was very critical. We didn't allow them to come in contact with the patient because the living conditions there, as you saw on the first slide of the sequence, are such that diseases spread and epidemics spread at an incredible rate. So consequently, they're kept completely to the outside of the building with only physicians on the inside. Now, I want to put these slides in just to show you that the kind of evolution that's taking place in the attitudes of field theory and the kind of changes that have taken place since the early fascination with the rotated square and its mathematical, the analytical aspects of the square. I think we're continuing to develop field theory into new forms. This particular project was for Tokyo. It's a library project that is currently under design, it's in schematic design. And you can see in the slide on the left, the field that was developed for this building is an outgrowth of the concept at Miami University, and that there are a series of concentric squares which radiate about a central nodal point. And these squares increase as you approach the perimeter of the building. Now this was reflected in the building facade, as you can see on the right, both in terms of the form of the facade itself, in terms of rounded elements, and additionally in the window glass. Tokyo has a very unique kind of energy code. It's much more stringent than anything we have here in the United States. And they have a very kind of complex system of solar angles. And you're given credits for decreasing the amount of glass as you approach the south side. So consequently, the concept of this building was to create a series of rounded elements which, as they approach the south, decrease in glass area and also increase in reflectivity of the glass, so that as you go around the corner, you reach a very wide open glass plane and very small opaque surface. And as you come back toward the south end, you approach a very narrow kind of a glass area and very large opaque surface. The same thing is expressed in another building in a complex, which is essentially an office building, which not only, I think, has responds to the sun, but I think also has certain very definite iconographic references that you can see pretty quickly to Japanese culture. Well, in summary, I just want to point out that I think that obviously the interchangeable part and the repetitive element is, which are obviously the dominant, some of the dominant aspects of modern architecture, are going to be with us to stay, at least for the foreseeable future due to the nature of our society. And the current flight toward pluralistic expression and toward eclecticism is certainly an understandable reaction, I think, to the monotonous repetition of form that we often see in modern architecture. But I hope that these slides have pointed out the potential that multiplicity can exist within the context of an orderly framework. With that, that's the end of the slides, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, either about our design process, about life in a big city, life in a big firm, what it's like to graduate from CAP, or anything. Yes. Well, the fields are generated in the minds of the man. The fields are sometimes drawn by a computer. We have one of the advantages of working in a large firm is that there are a large variety of technical resources that you can use. And our firm is broken down a series of small studios, so it's like a series of little offices working within a big one. And that gives us the capability of using the overall resources of the office for each little office. And one of the resources we have is a very sophisticated computer resource. We've developed a series of software programs that allow us to use a very, actually I think it's an incredible series of graphic design tools. We're just beginning to use these in the field theory applications. Obviously, the design itself has to come from the person, but the physical drawing of it can come from the computer.
I think we might have addressed any further questions, Craig, with Coffee outside, but I do think we have maybe a minute.
Okay.